it's even better. And Elena Vakulenko is co-author, so she could interpret, interfere. You can begin.
Dear colleagues, dear students, we would like to present today our joint paper. This is part of our project. Our presentation will consist of different parts. You can see this in our papers which we give for you. And let me also introduce my colleague. As Evgeny said, this is Sardadvar from Vienna University. Sasha will present our paper, and I try to help and answer all your questions.
Thank you. Good evening. It's a great pleasure for me to present the joint research project with Jelena, which we have started actually last year when we noticed that we have similar research topics and methods, and our focus is to take a look at migration within Russia and in order to explain how it happens and which role distance plays. And as Jelena mentioned, I want to present two papers which we are currently working on. The first one is called The Impact of Distance on Interregional Migration in Russia, a spatial econometric approach. We presented it at the April conference here in Moscow, where we used data on interregional migration within Russia during the first decade of this century, the years 2000 to 2010. And by using a spatial econometric approach, we want to see what role distance plays in Russia, not least because some Russian regions are very, very large. And so we think that distances are very far, especially when compared to Central Europe. I come from a country when you travel 100 kilometers with the train, then you're in the next region. When you travel 400 kilometers with the train, then you're in another country. And so I'm aware that this means nothing to you. But we know that distance does play a role within the European Union with respect to migration. I also did some work on that issue. So we want to check whether we find similar patterns in Russia. The second paper we are currently working on, so this is very early stage of progress, will be more theoretical. We are currently working on a theoretical model to explain migration. It's a so-called new economic geography type of model. And Jelena told me that I'm not so sure whether new economic geography modeling, if all of you are familiar with these types of models. I will present the basic idea and how it works and what will be the expected results. Now, I start with paper one, and I will talk about the determinants of internal migration, what does literature say, what determines internal migration. Then I will present our regression specifications, then the results, and then discuss these results, and as well as an output on which has to be done yet. Now, what's the motivation behind this paper? Firstly, we have an interesting situation in Russia where, due to central planning, migration did not follow market conditions, but it was based on other decisions. And now we have free labor movement within a very large economic area, which makes it interesting on its own right. And as I mentioned before, we know that from the European Union that distances matter. And studies for Russia have shown this effect too, but so far we do not know very much about spatial effects. Now, theory says that labor migration is motivated by three opportunities, namely free migrations, employment opportunities. So if you have a good chance to get a job, a better job in another region, then this should increase the probability that someone migrates. Then income differentials, we know especially from the European Union that this can make a large difference with respect to migration. For instance, with the accession of the 12 new member states in the years 2004 and 2007, we saw very large migration flows from the new member states to the established member states, which was obviously due to income differences. And then distance, but we do not know very much about distance. We know that it plays a role, that it should play a role for a number of reasons, but when we think of Europe, for instance, we also know that culture plays a big, very important role, and also language. So if the destination region has the same language as the source region, this of course increases the probability of migrating. And theory says about distance that there are maybe 4 reasons why distance should have an effect on migrating. Firstly, of course, larger distances increase the costs, the direct cost of migrating. Then also it influences the opportunity costs, psychic costs, information costs, and another factor is that sometimes migrants follow people who have migrated before. Often makes it easier to go to a place where you already know people, already know that many people from your own home country or home region are already residing, so this will also increase or decrease with distance. Now in Europe we see a couple of interesting effects, and empirical studies conducted so far have shown for many countries, including Spain and Germany, that the effect of income is not as high as would be expected by theory. Why is that the case? One explanation is that it is not current income differences which are important for an individual to make a decision to migrate, but it is the expected income of an individual. What will be the income that I get if I migrate? It does not make much sense to migrate to a region or a country where income is high if you don't have a chance to get a job. But it would make sense to migrate to a region or a country where perhaps wages are not that high if you can improve your own situation. So what some studies have shown is that it is often they often do not find income as a significant variable which could explain migration, but rather income opportunities or expected income, which is related to labor demand and unemployment. And another topic which is discussed in the literature is human capital, and this is also related to the issue of economic geography. There is a hypothesis which is very old, actually dates back to Gunnar Myrdal in the 1950s, who said that human capital plays an important role for three reasons. Firstly, considering the individual, it is more profitable to migrate if you can improve your income situation, and this is related to what you can actually offer on the labor market. If your skills are high, then you have the chance to get a higher wage in a different region or country, and this increases your chances of migrating. Second reason is, why is it also more profitable for young people to migrate? Main reason is the younger you are, the more you gain from migrating. If you migrate with 60, then you have only a couple of years to take advantage of that. If you're 20, you stay in that region, then your expected income will be much higher. Second reason is that once a region is able to attract human capital, then this region itself becomes more attractive for investments, because firms find skilled labor there, and this will, so human capital will attract investments, and because if you then have a large number of firms, they are going to need more skilled labor, and this will in turn attract more human capital, because this region then offers more employment opportunities for skilled labor. Now we want to test these hypotheses, and we have regression specification with 78 regions. The observation period is 2001 to 2010, and the data source is Ostad. And we start with a fixed effects regression, where we take time lags of the explanatory variable going back 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years to control whether different explanatory variables have different impacts for different years. And then we use a so-called spatial lag of fixed effects regression, spatial lag of X fixed effects regression, which refers to the fact that we multiply each vector of variables by a spatial weight matrix. Are you familiar with this concept, or should I go into more detail with that? What does this mean? Spatial econometrics? Yes, as usual.
The answer is heterogeneous. Some people know this idea more, some less, maybe especially young ones, maybe not so.
Well, then I say just
The idea is,
a few words. We multiply each variable by a factor which is a function of distance to each region. We have here the net migration of region I at t, and we have a couple of explanatory variables, x1 to xk. And if you consider the vector of explanatory variables, and we multiply this vector by a matrix which consists of elements which capture the inverse of the distance to region I, which means the closer region J is to region I, the higher will be this factor Wij, which is then multiplied by x. So this has higher impact on net migration of region I. And we construct these spatial weights, as I mentioned before, by an inverse distance function, and we use, due to the geography of Russia, we use k nearest neighbors, which means that each region has the same number of neighbors, namely 5, 10, and 20. This is because we have regions with very large area sizes in Russia and some with very small area sizes, and this would mean that if we would use another function, then the number of neighbors would be very different for each region. This is why each region gets the same number of neighbors.
I'm sorry.
Yes?
And the cutoff distance, how it's defined?
It's 5, 10, and 20 nearest neighbors. So the function is defined in a way that each region, you have for each region the neighbors have these weights, distance divided by the sum. If in a way that you have a fixed number of neighbors. It's either 5, 10, or 20. If you consider region I, and you consider the 5 regions which are closest to region I, then these are your neighbors. And this is normalized.
You didn't fix the distance,
Yes.
but you fixed the
number
number of
Numbers,
neighbors.
Yes.
Yes.
And the nearest this number, okay.
So
Okay,
the number of
okay.
distance is different
That's
for
only
different regions.
for better understanding.
And the sum of these elements equals 1 for each row in the spatial weight matrix. Now, first regression results are non-spatial results. So this is the first specification which we have seen. And here we already see some interesting results, as I think. Firstly, we have indeed no significant effect of income. Here this left column includes only internal migration within Russia, and this one also includes external migrants who come from third countries. So we have no significant effect of income on net migration, but we do have a highly significant effect of economic growth. Interestingly, unemployment is also non-significant, as well as tertiary education and the share of students with respect to the population, which we take as indicators of human capital. So it seems as if human capital has no effect. Then the second time lags are similar for income and growth, but here we see that the number of students does have a positive impact on net migration, but not the number of people who have tertiary education. So these are the people who have already completed university, these are those who are currently at university. And then if you continue this, then we see for the third time lag.
Sorry.
Yeah.
One additional question. What about the explained variables? This is the number of migrated or the share of it?
Sorry, I didn't.
Maybe I omitted. Yeah.
This is net migration, so this is immigrants minus
Right,
immigrants
but
divided
the
by
number,
population.
not a relative.
It's relative. Divided by
Relative
population.
share of.
Yes, yes.
Ah,
Divided
okay.
by population.
I see. Okay, sorry.
So here we see a weak effect of unemployment. And what we do also see is similar results for whether we include external migration or not, results which include external migration a bit higher. We see that it seems as if these numbers are multiplied by a factor of about 2. But apart from that, the results are similar. And the time dummies are negative. Now we continue with the spatial econometric specification. And here we have these numbers of neighbors, so we compare results for 5 nearest neighbors, 10 nearest neighbors, and 20 nearest neighbors. And we see that this W indicates that these are the spatially lagged variables. If we start with these 5 variables, we see the results are similar. Again, we have this effect, positive effect of growth. And then we have a negative effect of growth in neighboring regions, which means that there's a contrasting effect. Economic growth within a region I has a positive effect on net migration, but if it happens in the neighboring regions, which means that if the neighboring regions have higher economic growth than your own region, then this has a negative impact on net migration. Put differently, it seems as if people would follow economic growth. They might migrate to the region where growth is higher. Apart from that, we do not see much differences to the results before. So, apart from some minor effects. As a next step, we include 3 further explanatory variables, which are also derived from theory, namely the share of young population, as I briefly mentioned before. The incentive to migrate is higher for, or should be higher for younger people because they are able to take advantage
Who was
of
young?
it. Who was young?
Young is younger than 25.
Then our old population goes the other way around. And then the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient is related to migration, which is then related to skills. The idea behind this is that if you are highly skilled and you work in an economy with high inequality, and this means it's good for you because you get a higher share of income. If you are lowly skilled and you work in an economy with low wage inequality, then this is also good for you because your wage is relatively higher than it would be in an economy with higher inequality. So considering this, we would expect an effect of the Gini coefficient on migration if we observe migration within Russia, which is influenced by the skills of the migrants. But as we see here, we do not see such an effect. So these variables are all insignificant if you consider all regions. However, we find interesting differences when we divide Russia into Western Russia and Eastern Russia, where we have 52 Western Russian regions and 26 Eastern Russian regions.
Where is the border between East and West?
It is to Ural, it's in Ural.
Asian Europe.
And I find this very interesting because if you look at the significant results, they don't match. You have the positive effect of income in the West, which we have seen before, which seemed to have no effect if you consider all regions. but now if we split the observation area into west and east, then we see that income matters in the west and growth matters in the east. An interpretation for that would be that income is a long-run indicator. It doesn't change so quickly. Even if an economy experiences some bad years, it doesn't mean that it gets poor from one day to the next, like Italy, for instance. And it seems as if people who immigrated in the East are reacting more to short-run differences or to shocks, while long-run income matters more in the West. And we also see an interesting difference. We have a positive impact of young population in the West, but of the share of students in the East. So although students are most often very young people, this does not mean that this would have the same effect. And we also use the spatial regression for both regions, and we see basically similar results. So for instance, share of young population here in the West has this positive impact within region I, but becomes negative if you consider the shares of young populations in neighboring regions. I should also mention that in this case we do not use time lags for each year in the regression, but we take the average of the preceding 3 years to avoid multicollinearity, because we have too many variables and too few regions to use spatial and time lags for 3 years for each variable in these cases. And we see a similar effect in the East. You see here, for instance, a very high negative effect of growth in neighboring regions, but only for the 5 closest neighbors. This negative effect disappears if you consider too many neighbors, which has possibly to do with the large distances in Eastern Asia, because 20 next neighbors in Eastern Asia means that you go from maybe Kamchatka to, I don't know, Novosibirsk or even farther, which is a very far distance. So, to conclude, the main results show that economic growth acts as a strong pull and push factor. If time lags are not too high, we've seen that people react to economic growth relatively quickly. But then we have seen, I will show this on the next slide, that we have different effects in the East and the West. We have seen that unemployment has also the expected sign and effect, but only with a considerable timeline of 3 years. And this suggests that indeed, like European studies have found from a couple of economists, that expected income is more important than current income. If we think that economic growth increases labor demand in the short run, then this would induce migration, and this is a short-run effect. And we also see that human capital only plays a minor role, but we see a positive impact of students. We are not so sure whether this has to do with the positive role that human capital plays in an economy, or maybe it's just because universities are found in certain regions. But perhaps we should also mention that since we use very large regions, we cannot control for agglomeration effects. Which could be also an effect, but we are not able to control for them because we have relatively large regions. So we have seen, however, that growth matters more in the East. We find no significant effect in the West. And we have also seen that the influence of closest neighbors is farther reaching in the west, which means that in the west a higher number of neighbors matters, which is probably because distance is shorter, we have closer neighbors, which then means that distance plays a role. And what we see from studies from other countries is that it is not only the market conditions in the region which matter for migration, but we find important differences between sectors, which should be examined in more detail for Russia, and this is what we want to do with the second paper. So that's it for the first paper. Now I don't know whether we should discuss the first paper first and then talk about the second paper, or do we want first present the second paper and then discuss?
What do you prefer?
Do you have
Some questions for the first part of the report?
We will have. Okay, then you are welcome.
Thank you very much for so interesting presentation. I have several technical questions. Okay, could you return to the slide number 8?
Human capital.
Human capital, yes. I'm not quite sure that with your first hypothesis, because there exist high-skilled and low-skilled workers, and I think this your hypothesis is true only for high-skilled workers, but not for low-skilled.
Is it a question or
It's my, it's
a remark.
I'm not agree, and
maybe you
maybe.
have questions as well for
Okay. Okay. It's the first. My first question. Okay. I think that you are not right. That's more profitable only for more educated workers to migrate. I think that for low educated workers also, sometimes is also profitable to migrate to reach the low skilled position. How do you think?
Well, this is actually, thank you for the question, which is of course important. This is the main reason why we included the Gini coefficient. And it may be profitable for low-skilled workers to go to an economy with low wage inequality. If you consider two economies with identical average income but different inequality levels, this means that someone who gets a low income, a relatively low income, is better off in an economy where income differences are low, because then his or her income would increase. This is something which we also observe in Central Europe. For instance, we have many immigrants who are low-skilled, and one reason may be also not only the absolute differences in income, but also equality. However, we didn't find such effect. So, considering your question, I would say we have this hypothesis, but for Russia we don't find any results.
May I ask another question?
Yes, yes.
Slide number 11, please. How do you choose the number of legs? It's unusual to include 3 special legs. It's quite interesting, but
Yes.
how to choose the number?
I didn't mention that,
Not
sorry.
2,
Yeah,
not
yes.
4.
It is
It's
because
interesting.
studies which have been conducted for America or for Europe have found that migrants often react in a 3-year
It's
time.
usual practice, yes?
It's not usual, but it is what results say, that potential migrants need some time to make a decision. we would have used even more time lags because just because a result from empirical studies says it's 3 years, it doesn't mean that it couldn't be also 5 years. But then we would run into problems with our observation period because we only have 10 years. And as you have seen, we do indeed find differences. For instance, if you consider unemployment rate, we find significant results only for a 3-year time lag, which means that people react more slowly to unemployment than they do to changes in growth.
Next slide, please. It's very unusual, at least for me, choice of weights. You use distance instead inverse distance.
Inverse distance.
What is the intuition and different number of neighbors? What was the intuition?
No, this means we use inverse distance.
Inverse distance,
Yes.
not it's more usual.
If you have
I see. I see.
so the
this.
farther
I see.
away the region is, the lower will be the element. So if you have
Okay.
and the sum of these elements equals 1. This is why maybe it's a bit misleading.
Distance. Okay.
Thank you. Next slide, please. You have used students as proxy for human capital.
Also,
Yeah.
Did you try to use another proxy, for example, number of patents or share of people with a high education or something like that?
We have this is share of
Wait,
highest
it's share.
Yeah.
I see.
Do you know what that means, tertiary?
Yes,
Yes, okay.
tertiary, yes.
But as mentioned before, we don't find significant results for tertiary education, which is also an indicator that skills do not play an important role with respect to migration within Russia. So we don't find any evidence that it would be highly skilled or lowly skilled people who migrate.
And the last question, when you split all region on eastern and western, did you take into account the mutual influence of two groups regions on each other? For example, Moscow influence on all regions in Russia, I think.
But we have, that's the reason why we use a spatial weight matrix. We see that with the K, with 20 nearest neighbors,
It was neighbors
effects
only
become, we don't have any
in
special
east groups.
effects.
Separately.
yes, but for example, if some region is in eastern part, but we also consider their neighbors
Yes,
from
yes.
western part.
Yes, yes,
so
yes.
So
we,
20 nearest neighbors, it may be from eastern or from western part,
Yeah.
or 20 meters.
But you used observations only for
For
eastern
eastern
or
and
western,
yes,
only
yes.
through weights.
Yes.
I see. Thank you.
yes. And this is also one of our results that we find almost no spatial effects restricted if the distance becomes larger.
But we don't consider the
Any
fact
other
as you in
questions?
your paper.
Lena,
Thank you.
don't begin. Join.
Thank you.
Do
Other
you have-
questions?
May I ask a general question? You have some characteristics of fitting of your models. It's not so high.
Mhm.
Maybe,
This is high for
but
regulation.
it's significant, I understand. But your goal was to find the determinants. This law measure of fitting means that maybe, I could imagine two explanations. There are other determinants which are beyond the scope of your investigation, and maybe another reason, there are different models for different regions. So the panel data, is it possible to gather all data in one model? Maybe you cannot answer exactly now, but maybe some ideas about these possibilities.
Yes, I think both arguments could be true. But the first thing is what we want to do in the next paper is to focus on different sectors which could have an effect. And the other one is, if we take a look here between east and west, we find the explanation how in the east is much higher than in the west. Interestingly, but we do not know so far why this is the case.
Yes, and also,
Yes, of
like
course,
to
you
add-
are
yes,
closest.
because when I consider gravity model for migration, the R squared was lower than this model. Because maybe I don't include, for example,
You
special
mean
maths.
you used another
And that's
special weights matrix?
not special maths, but another data, not net migration rate, but direct flow. Gravity model.
I see, I see.
And R squared was around 1.8.
Not the total, yes.
Yes, so lower than this one. So in this paper we see much more higher R squared than in my previous paper. But
Of
also,
course.
you know, that it's very
It's not the goal to get,
Yes.
but the questions, what's the reason, why, is the next step of investigation of research. Okay, thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, the second part. Who is responsible for the second? Elena or you? It's your choice.
The next part is more difficult for understanding because this is only theoretical.
The second
Yes.
one.
Yes.
Now we have empirical results, and our next step is to explain what we see. It's one thing to find out which effects are significant, which is a different thing to be able to explain it theoretically. And I want to talk about the concept and relevance of market potential and why we think this is especially important in Russia. The outline of the model, the migration equation which follows from the model, then talk about the economic specification, and no preliminary results so far. This is work in progress. But maybe we can also talk about the implications and what will be our next steps. We start with the heavily influencing model developed by Paul Krugman, for which he also got his Nobel Prize in 2008. His co-periphery model, where he explains why industries locate in regions where already much industry is to be found, why geography matters. This model has been taken up a lot of times over the past 20 years, and we want to further development of a paper by author Crozet, which was published in 2004. In Paul Krugman's model, we have two sectors. He calls it agricultural and industrial sector, but these are not to be taken literally, but what he means is a sector in which workers are only low skilled and not mobile, while in the other sector, which is in this case the industrial sector, workers are high skilled and are also able to migrate if they find better conditions. Crozet has added a third sector, namely a goods sector, of which Crozet has added a services goods sector, which cannot be traded across the whole economy, and what we want to do is to add a fourth sector, which we think matters at least for some Russian regions, which is a commodity sector, the exploitation of natural resources, which may explain why some regions receive migrants, even though they are maybe not very pleasant places to live, like northern Siberia, population population density is very low and the weather is not very good, but still people go there, and there must be a reason for that. Then the theoretical model is transformed into an econometric specification. This is our current step, and we will then, if we have accomplished this, we will use sector-specific data which we have already collected for 78 Russian, for the same 78 Russian regions for the same observation period, and then we will see which role sectors play. Now the idea of this core periphery model developed by Paul Krugman dates back to the 1950s. Some authors like Hirschman, for instance, but also Müller studied why do firms locate in regions where there are already many firms. For instance, the automobile industry is located in southern Germany, or if you think of the United States or Northern America in the 20th century, then you find 85% of industrial production was located in the northeast of the United States, and the rest of 15% was spread around the rest of this big country. And even these 15% were most often industrial activities which could not take place anywhere else, like exploitation of natural resources and transport. And what's also interesting is that this industrial core in the United States was not restricted to the United States, but also swapped over, spilled over to Canada. So there must be some mechanisms at work which explain what firms go to where firms already are. And theory says there are two effects at work, namely backward linkages and forward linkages. Backward linkages means influence on location choice of firms, like transport costs or increasing returns, or what also matters, still matters of course, but which was very important in the 19th century and also in the 1950s. Being close to other firms which produce goods which you can use for your own production. And then we have forward linkages which influence the location choice of individuals. What do individuals want? They want high wages, okay, but it is not only the nominal wage that matters, but it also matters what you can buy from this wage. Like if cost of living are very high, then the real wage is relatively low. So we think that this matters especially in Russia. I've been to Siberia myself last year, and I noticed that some products were more expensive there than here, but it may also be other things which matter. For instance, what does a flat cost? If you consider in Central Europe, for instance, Vienna and Munich are two cities which can be compared to each other because they're similar size and similar average income, but housing is much more expensive in Munich than in Vienna. So real wage is higher in Vienna than in Munich, and this would mean that this should be a better place to live, given that nominal wage and everything else is equal. No, but the old question in economic geography is what influences what? Is it that firms go to where firms already are, which attracts firms and workers? Or do workers themselves attract firms? As I mentioned before, if you want to build a factory, then you need qualified workers, and you have a preference, of course, for a location where you can find these skilled workers. So there's also an incentive for firms to go to where workers are. These two forces reinforce each other and lead to clusterings, and it's also difficult to separate them from each other in empirical studies, which is the reason why empirical studies focus either on backward linkages or on forward linkages. And to cut this short, what we do is we focus on forward linkages. We are interested in migration, so this is what we study. We take a look at do migrants go to where they find better living conditions. Or put differently, where market potential is higher. Market potential is a concept which also dates back to the 1950s, which means that a certain region has a certain size, which means it has a market on its own, which it can be delivered. But then there are a lot of regions around this very region, and they may be bigger or smaller. And the bigger they are, and the closer the big regions, the big economies are, the higher is market potential, because the higher is the possibility that you can sell your own products to other regions, the possibility that you can export them. So the question which was raised by Jose and which we take up again is whether migrants follow market potential. Because if they do locate in regions with high market potential, this means they are also closer to the goods that other regions produce, which means they are cheaper and maybe also more to their taste. If you then consider a region in northeastern Siberia, this is the idea, very far away from big markets. So this means higher prices for consumers and worse conditions for producers. Each model is built on a number of assumptions, which make life easier. As mentioned before, we have 4 sectors: agriculture, manufactured goods are the ones which were considered by Krugman. Then Jose added services sectors, and we add commodity sectors. As in the other models, we assume that there are some workers which are not highly qualified, which are not mobile, who do not move at all, which we refer to as the agricultural sector. But nevertheless, the product of this, it may also be called traditional sector, can be consumed all over the country. Workers in the other 3 sectors are mobile and may migrate. Now the commodity sector which we add means that the good which is produced cannot be consumed. Consumers have no interest in consuming commodities, but they are exported to third countries at world market prices, which means that the market price is exogenous. It's completely exogenous. It is not what happens within the country, has nothing to do with price development, but it means that something may change within the country. As in the other models, manufactured and service goods sectors are monopolistically competitive and produce horizontally differentiated goods. And manufactured goods are traded throughout the country, where trade induces transport costs, which means the farther away the location of production of this good, the more expensive it gets. In contrast, service goods can only be consumed where they are produced. These are the production functions of the manufacturing and services sector. They are designed in a way that they induce increasing returns, which means, or which takes up this idea that the bigger the economy is, the lower average production cost gets. The more there is produced in one region, the lower the cost. In contrast, the commodity sector, which we introduce, is confronted with increasing marginal cost and decreasing returns, and we have a production function which depends on the world price for commodities. If the price increases, then production also increases, but with decreasing effect. So if the price doubles, then production will less than double. And which will play an important role with respect to migration. From the equations we saw before, we can derive a labor input equation, and if we take the first derivative of this labor input with respect to time, then we get a function which explains the change in labor demand in the commodity sector in region I as a function of say, this is a measure of production elasticity, which can also be interpreted as technology in that region, multiplied by the change in world price for the commodity group. Now, a very important role is played by the price indexes in these kinds of models. And if you take a look at this function here, this tau represents transport costs, and the higher the distance between two regions I and J, the higher transport costs we'll get, which means that the price index of region I is a function of the goods produced and the prices within that region I, and also of the goods produced in all other regions in the industrial sector. And the farther away the location of production is, the higher will be the transport cost, and the higher will be the price index for manufactured goods in region I. As we have seen in the list of assumptions, price index of service goods are not traded across the economy, therefore distance has no effect on this price index. Now, this is the key equation of the model. This is utility. We can interpret this as utility from migrating by comparing two regions. It's a function of three equations, where this one is already part of the Krugman model. This is the equation of the real wage, where we see the real wage is a function of nominal wage in region I, divided by the price indexes for manufactured goods and service goods, and the shares consumed of these goods. So the higher the price index, the lower real wage will become. This rho is a function of the chance of getting a job in region J, if a migrant considers from migrating from region I to region J, which is a function of the change in labor demand in the commodity sector. So we assume that if labor demand increases in the commodity sectors, because the world price for commodities has increased, then this increases the chance of getting a job, unemployment, and the employment rate. And this R is a function of the relationship between regions I and J, where this delta represents distance. This delta equals 1 if two regions do not have a common border, and S is area size. we can then model expected migration flows by this function, which we which was already used in the Crozet model. However, our V is different because we include, in contrast to Crozet, the commodity sector, and also one of our price indexes looks a bit different. And there are also some technical details like unemployment, employment, area size. So then, when we rearrange this equation, then it looks something like this, which looks a bit complicated, but it does only include essentially what we've seen before. This means the number of all emigrants from region I who go to region J at one point in time. So this is the share of all regions who originate in region I, who go to region J. And this is determined by the real wage in region J, the chance of getting a job in region J, and this relation between regions I and J. What we see here is the rest of the equation which we have seen before, and this will function as a region fixed effect in the econometric specification. And then if we insert here into this real wage equation, for real wage what we have seen before, price, the nominal wage, price index, and for rho, the change in labor demand, and the function which we have seen for change in labor demand and unemployment and employment, and this relationship, then it looks like this. But then if we further rearrange this equation and include the price index, then we can display this equation as it looks here. And finally, this is important because we want to use it for the econometric specification, we reformulate what we have seen here. So we introduce for n and p the functions which we have for these variables, and then we can express migration from I to j as an equation which depends on the nominal wage in region J, total labor in the manufacturing sector in region J, total labor in the services sector in region J. Then this relation between wages in region J and all other regions, as well as labor in region J in the manufacturing sector in relation to all other regions. Productivity in the commodities goods sector in region J. Total quantity produced, so the size of the commodity sector in region J. Price change of the commodities good between T-1 and T-2 actually. Unemployment in region J, employment in region J, distance between I and J, the common border between I and J, and the size of region J. So these are the variables which matter, and our first step will then be an econometric specification, which is simpler than what we have seen before, when we take all the variables which enter the equation which we have seen before, but use a very simple linear specification which resembles the gravity type equation. So these are the same explanatory variables which we have seen before, and then we will see which values the coefficients will take on. So the second specification will be one which resembles what we have seen before. This is exactly the same as on the slide before the slide we have just seen. But this is a little bit more complicated because of this term. The third specification will then be a nonlinear specification, which will look exactly like this, where we will also try to estimate the values of these coefficients. So, for the second paper, we are currently developing the model. This is what I have just shown. We have a nonlinear econometric specification, which we will estimate as soon as possible. We will make further econometric specifications, and we will also then simulate the theoretical model to see how it behaves when we insert any numbers. So, thank you for your attention, and if there are
Okay.
questions.
Let's go to questions once again. And as for me, it was rather difficult to follow your derivations. What is the main ideas? And maybe I'll begin from the question. You derived some theoretical model and then presented the econometric model for estimation. But in your theoretical model, you had some equal coefficients.
Yes.
So, it should be followed by restrictions or coefficient of the model. If not, okay, but you can test after estimation.
Yes, we are right. We see it here.
This one, yeah.
And there's a second one, which is
Oh, maybe a lot, right.
two. It's two.
Two price, yeah? Okay.
Well, yes, exactly. You will have to do that.
You want to estimate with restrictions.
From our theoretical model.
It would be better to mention this. Yeah.
And also maybe without restriction, then try to test how this our theoretical prediction is good for our empirical part.
And once again, what is the main addition from your point of view in the theoretical model?
So, what new economic geography models show is that because of these effects, and if transport costs are low enough, industry will locate in just one region and leaving the other region undeveloped. This is the main result of the paper by Krugman. He has two regions, and all industry will locate in just one region if transport costs are low enough. This is, as I discussed, we have some evidence of strong location effects in industry, like in North America in the end of the 19th century, but it is not that extreme. If we look at the world, we have some regions with more industry and also high-tech production than others, but it is not as extreme as Krugman's model. And what we want to add is to show how some regions are still able to prosper and to thrive, even if they are not close to the economic center, which would mean far away from Moscow, and to what extent we can explain this, let's call it survival of regions, if you consider the commodity sector as an example. So if you consider a third effect, which is exogenous, which is able to explain why there are effects which will support a so-called peripheral divide, but not as extreme as in Krugman's model. So there is another effect of labor demand as a function of something which comes from the outside, and this changes also the results. We will probably, if we simulate the model, I'm almost sure that the result will not be an extreme division of production, but something in between, and we will also see the simulation results and how strong this location effect will work. And also the effect of price indexes and distance.
Other questions, please. Go ahead.
And also in our model, our probability to find a job is also endogenous. not exogenous as an
If it's
improvement
not a
model.
question,
No, this is answer for
please
your question.
face.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And one additional assumptions in our model, that in our model, probability to find a job in another sector is not exogenous as an improved product model. We try to do this raw probability to find a job, endogenous one. So it's also defined from our models. So we not include only unemployment rate and employment rate as it Crozet did, but we also add something what did our model also endogenous in this case. And our probability to find job.
Change in labor demand, which comes from
Because in Russia, we know that commodity sector, so oil, gas production, is one of the main source of our GDP. And most of our regions, for example, two main regions and others, are rich from the, of these natural resources. But if you, and also the regions has a lot high income. But usually migrants don't want to move to this region. They would like to work in this region, so there are huge number of temporary workers, but not a registered one. And we try to also
По-английски
uh,
вахтовый метод.
temporary workers. Yes, available.
Okay.
Yes, and we try to catch this in our model. So also include the the difference in wages and labor demand in different sectors. Because we think that this is very important in our case in Russia. Because in previous models, migration models in Russia, usually authors don't consider industrial structure.
Okay. I'm not sure that the temporary workers is a good name, good term for this Vachtin is possible. They are permanently hired, but with specific working schedule. 2 weeks here, 2 weeks here, but it's not temporary. Maybe I'm not a specialist in labor economics, maybe. Okay. We have,
Now we have
do you want to
some
have
addition.
something?
About our second part, now we try to estimate first empirical results, econometric model, but not for our case, but for Crozet model. His specification with not
Which is the exact name?
Crozet model.
Is he French?
Yes. So
Because
Crozet-
Sasha used crozet.
Ah, sorry.
Right.
I usually use this model, the first.
well, you mean
Yes, the last
non-linear.
Non-linear, yes.
Non-linear corresponds to this. So it is basically the same as this.
Yes, we try to do first trial
Yeah.
estimations without these
Which
non-linear
kind
terms.
of methods?
Now without non-linearities, only linear case. So we
Linear,
don't
I see,
include
I see.
estimated this one. But Crozet used non-linear method. OLS, non-linear OLS.
No, why not?
Mhm.
Why not?
We also try to do this method, but now I estimated on the first
Oh,
result with the linear case and receive highly
We are
significant
going
results.
to use GMM method. It's a fashion now.
Maybe we will try to program something, but you see that it's rather complicated.
But this is the
especially-
simple
this
version.
is simple version, yes. But this one, we have a lot of non-linearities and also, yes, you see the same coefficients, so a lot of restrictions.
Do you have any question?
Uh,
Yeah, oh yeah. Great.
How do you choose the functional forms for your equation? It was idea of Crozet, or it was
Which one?
Which equation?
all cos They are quite different.
All of them.
All of them, it's not clear for me,
You
but
mean
they are
the Russian
different.
functions?
Specify your question.
I'm not expert in this field, actually, sorry.
Olga,
Like Nikolai, for example.
uh,
For example,
but
why
these
it
are
is
taken, these are
linear?
taken from Causet.
It's,
This we introduced. This is new.
we'll
So
take into account the experience of previous
yes,
researchers.
yes, yes.
And the
We-
second, for example.
It is an augmentation of the Causet one. We add this fourth
This
sector.
specification is your suggestion.
Yes.
It's yours. And the third and fourth are also the same function.
This follows from what we have introduced here. So this is also new. This is sector B, is the commodity sector. So everything which has this B.
It's quite comfortable for
That's why I decided to print for you copies of our presentation, because it's very difficult to see on the slides and understand something.
You are very smart.
And we changed this one because in Causet it's a multiplication of the unemployment rate and the nominal wage, which is a very ad hoc specification, as we think. In our case, it is endogenous, this probability of finding a job. And we slightly changed this term, but not the basic mechanism. The mechanism is the same, but we just like it more this way. Because in Causet, it does not add the area size into this model, but we introduces it then to the econometric specification, which we think is more elegant if we do it this way, because it is, we can introduce it also in this equation, and then we have an econometric specification which directly originates from the theoretical model.
And Croiset used his model for explanation migrants' flows, or it was yours
No,
idea?
he used for my recommendation.
Careful.
Mhm.
Crozet.
And it's also important to mention that Crozet was the first man who tried to explain this gravity specification for migration, which is empirical, from theoretical point of view.
And
Not
you were the
empirical.
second,
And
improved model.
yes, we add
Maybe
additional
success.
sectors and try to estimate this model for Russia. Because now there is a such empirical specification, but nobody estimates this for Russia. There is, we find one paper for other countries.
For Spain.
For Spain, yes. All the authors do the same as Crozet, using his
Croiset used data for Spain,
No.
French.
For 5 countries:
Five
Germany,
countries.
Netherlands, Italy, Britain, and France.
and then after
Which
Crozet,
level?
Inter-country,
Not
not
three.
inter-region.
Which level? Not two,
Not
not
one.
three.
Not one.
Oh, it's a bit boring.
yes, that's why we have more interesting data. That's why we
More
decided.
interesting.
Yes,
Good
we
data.
received more interesting results. So only 2 papers which use the first
How
Crozet.
he managed to estimate parameters with only 5 countries?
No, 5
No.
countries and migration.
That's
Yes,
one
yes,
uses
and
migration
and
within these countries. And
Yes.
one question which also comes to mind when you consider the Netherlands and market potential. The Netherlands is a very tiny country with only small distances, so it shouldn't make such a big difference as in Russia. So we think that this concept of market potential is of higher relevance for Russia than for small countries.
By the
such
way,
as
what is the
Netherlands.
definition of
Market
market potential?
Market potential is what you are able to sell if you produce in one region I, depending on the size of your own region.
How to measure it?
Well, GDP, for instance.
GDP?
Demand, yes. And then, but also who are your neighbors and how far they are away. If you are neighboring very rich regions, very big countries, then the market potential is higher. But when you're located far away from everything, then the market potential is lower, even if your own economy is very big, because distance makes exports more expensive and imports also more expensive.
Not so clear,
Mm-hmm.
because GDP is measure of additional value, but market potential is issue of output.
Yes.
This is a great
It is a
difference.
proxy for output
No,
something.
no, no. Costs are different. You could have a lot of output with high level costs.
Mhm.
So, but for market potential, you could sell out this production. Okay. It's,
Well, I mean, you can take up the idea, introduce the variables, and then rearrange your equation that we have now total labor input in the equation and the nominal wage. In neighboring regions, and this is also a question of rearranging your equations and formulating them.
as any theoretical model, it can be rethinked
Mhm.
and augmented with some. Okay.
Yes, but the crucial thing here is, which is also new for Russia, if you look only at the empirical specification, is that we have these different sectors here, and we will see
Yeah,
in any case,
these four
something
sectors.
for the sectors, like also the influence of
No
this, what
migration
comes from
from the
outside.
agriculture.
Yes.
Yes?
So this is.
But
Is
I
it
would like to...
Gilson agrees?
No,
Ask it.
We don't discuss
Because,
this.
for example, Mexico and the United States,
yes,
the agricultural population is mobile.
but
Maybe in Russia,
it is not to be taken literal. Agriculture is also in Kruger's model a synonym for a sector which produces a traditional good in which the workers are not very mobile. Possibly for the reason you mentioned that it's not as profitable for low-skilled workers to migrate than for high-skilled workers. So it is also implicitly this idea that migration also depends on the skills. This is also why, which is also discussed by Jose, you may use for the agricultural sector, or you can think of the agricultural sector as something bigger than actual agriculture.
Okay. Something else? No? Thanks for your interesting report. And maybe, you can close, but it's not
Maybe you invite us once again when Sasha will come next time. Maybe in
With,
December.
Yes, if you want.
development of this.
Yes, and
Okay.
the first estimation with this new
Okay.
specification.
We'll keep in mind this possibility. Yeah. Well, why not?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Так, ребята, few words in Russian. Второй курс мы с вами останемся, остальные свободны. Значит, у нас на 23 число, через 2 недели. А времени мы решим.
Ну, 6 явно больше народу, чем 4.
Да, но это еще за счет у них не всегда есть необходимость занять их докладом. Я надеюсь, что мы сейчас мы поговорим, что